As the door clacked loudly and the curtains were pulled open, she stood there holding a lantern in her hand before quietly saying, "Now, at last, everything is ready." The legend of the Azure Fire had been passed down for centuries. It was said that when the kingdom of Geraint was first established, there existed a legendary archmage who struck fear into the hearts of every enemy of the kingdom with his powerful azure flame. However, after the death of King Ephron Geraint, the archmage completely vanished from history, leaving behind only a single prophecy. "If there comes a time when my name is called, I shall return once again and use my flame for the one who has summoned me." Centuries later, in the northern region of the Exiled territory, a young lady sat quietly as someone suddenly appeared before her and asked, "Who are you?" Looking at him calmly, she replied, "It is a pleasure to meet you, Archmage." The true name of the Archmage had finally been called. Staring at her in disbelief, he leaned closer and asked, "How did you call my name? Who are you?" As he moved even closer, the young lady simply smiled and said, "Goodness, what do you think? I am just an ordinary reincarnator." She then began explaining that she had originally been nothing more than an ordinary office worker from Korea who had died in a tragic plane crash during a business trip. But when she opened her eyes again, she realized she had been reincarnated into the world of a novel called Lady Catherine. Catherine was a sweet and kind girl from a poor family who eventually captured the hearts of the 5 most desirable bachelors in the entire kingdom. Unfortunately, she had not been reincarnated as the lonely heroine, one of Catherine's admirers, or even an insignificant bystander. Out of all the possible characters, she had become the woman who tirelessly devoted herself to trying to kill Catherine. Every single attempt ended in complete failure. She had become Everia Oberon. As the beloved daughter of Duke Oberon, Everia possessed immense wealth and breathtaking beauty, but her personality was so terrible that everyone despised her. When her beloved fiancé, Crown Prince Cassian, fell deeply in love with Catherine, Everia desperately tried to win him back by murdering the woman he loved. Naturally, her foolish and poorly planned scheme failed miserably, and she was caught red-handed. "Everia, you are a horrible woman. How could you even think of killing someone? And how could you dare lay a hand on Catherine of all people? Please!" Catherine's very first admirer was none other than Crown Prince Cassian Geraint. He was destined to become the king of Geraint and eventually marry Catherine by the end of the novel. Thinking back on it, she could not help but pity Everia. She truly had terrible taste in men. Was there really any reason for her to cling so desperately to this prince like the original Everia had? He was destined to end up with Catherine no matter what happened. Instead of wasting her life chasing after someone who would never love her, she could simply enjoy the rest of her days living in luxury as the Duke's daughter. After all, who needed love when you could have money? Looking directly at Cassian, she calmly corrected him. "Let me correct you on one thing. It was not murder. It was attempted murder. She is still alive, isn't she?" Cassian stared at her in disbelief before replying, "What kind of nonsense is that?" She simply shrugged before saying, "Well, anyway, why don't we just call off our engagement? I will even leave high society and live quietly somewhere else. Then will you finally be satisfied?" As the two of them walked past each other in opposite directions, Cassian suddenly turned around to say something, but before he could continue, she simply replied that she hoped they would never see each other again. She slammed the door shut behind her and walked away without looking back. After parting ways with the Crown Prince, Duke Oberon sent her away to one of the family's territories known as Exiled. Located in the cold and barren northern region, it seemed like the perfect place for her to spend the rest of her life relaxing peacefully. Or at least, that was what she had originally believed. The moment she arrived, reality struck her immediately. No one ever mentioned that it would be this cold. Shivering violently from head to toe, she looked toward her maid and asked through trembling lips, "How do people even survive in a place this freezing?" Trying her best to remain composed, the maid politely asked, "Would you like some warm tea, my lady?" "Forget the tea. Why isn't the fireplace lit yet? At this rate, I'm going to freeze to death," Everia complained while continuing to shiver uncontrollably. The frightened maid nervously explained, "Well, you see, the only wood available in the Exiled territory comes from the black steel tree. Unfortunately, the wood is so incredibly hard that it cannot catch fire properly, making it completely unsuitable as firewood. Because of that, all of the territory's firewood has always needed to be imported. However, about a week ago, the Exiled Company, which had been supplying firewood to our territory for over a century, suddenly cut off all trade with us." Hearing that name immediately caught Averia's attention. The Okale Company is affiliated with Earl Melior, the maternal relative of the first prince, isn't it? Yes, my lady, the maid answered. The first prince, Leiden Geraint, had lost his mother at a very young age and eventually lost his position as crown prince to Cashin, who had the overwhelming support of powerful noble families. As a result, he had always been on terrible terms with Averia, whose own family strongly supported the current crown prince. In the original novel, however, Leiden eventually died after the main characters got married. She had always pitted him as yet another character doomed to die, just like Averia herself, who ultimately took her own life. But who would have thought he would stab her in the back like this? Leiden Geraint, if you had something against me, you should have come directly to me. How pathetic do you have to be to take your anger out on an innocent territory? Letting out a long sigh, she finally turned toward her maid and ordered, Emma, stack the black steel logs inside the fireplace. Emma looked at her with concern before saying, but my lady, don't worry. I have a few tricks up my sleeve, Averia replied confidently. Going back to the very beginning, this was the reason she had summoned the legendary archmage mentioned in the novel, Theoharis. Looking at the mysterious man before her, she corrected herself. No, I suppose I should call you Theoharis the Demon. The legendary archmage, celebrated throughout history as one of Geraint's founding heroes, was in reality the demon of the Azure Flame. Long ago, the first king of Geraint had established his kingdom through a contract with this very demon. Theoharis looked at her curiously before asking, are you the descendant of that idiot who wanted to become king a few hundred years ago? But you look completely different. You don't resemble him at all. Sitting calmly before him, she spoke once again. Can I tell you my wish first before I explain everything? He narrowed his eyes as she continued, I need your azure flame. A grin slowly spread across his face as he replied, very well. So what exactly do you want to use my flame for? Money? Power? Honor? Just name it. I will burn and destroy everything for you. Shaking her head without the slightest hesitation, she answered, no, I just need fire. Theoharis immediately stumbled in disbelief before blurting out, what? Fire for warmth. It is freezing here, she explained casually. We need to light the fireplace, but the only way we have cannot be ignited with ordinary fire. That is why I summoned you. Once you are done, you can simply leave. So please hurry up. Just light the fire and be on your way. Come on, hurry up. Completely stunned by such an unbelievable request, Theoharis remained speechless for a moment before finally saying, no, I can't leave. Averia blinked in confusion before asking, pardon? Taking a step closer, he leaned in until he was only inches away from her face before quietly saying, didn't you know? The very moment you summoned a demon, you entered into a lifelong contract. As the fire in the fireplace crackled warmly, the two of them sat across from each other, enjoying the heat spreading throughout the room. She let out a satisfied laugh before saying, now this is more like it. I thought it would be blue since it's called the Azure Flame, but it really isn't. Ha 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 ha. Anyway, are you saying that you're going to grant all of my wishes until the day I die? Who would have thought demons were such suckers? Theoharis looked at her with a serious expression before replying, that is because there is usually a price for every wish someone makes. Blood. War. Pleasure. I even received the firstborn child of that idiot who became king. You are the very first person who has ever summoned me without having to pay any sort of price. How exactly did you manage to do that? His reaction was hardly surprising. After all, the demon god had erased the names of every demon from the memories of everyone in this world, making it nearly impossible for anyone to summon one. Averia simply smiled before replying, well, since I am the one who called you, I'll take full responsibility for you. The moment he heard those words, he immediately jumped to his feet with excitement and asked, really? Does that mean you're going to let me kill people and fight? She answered without the slightest hesitation, I'm just going to feed you and give you a place to stay. What? Completely devastated, he collapsed onto the floor in despair before crying out, I'm doomed. Looking down at him, she asked, do you really want me to make your life miserable? He laughed confidently before replying, I'd like to see you try. Averia smiled mischievously before reminding him, you said it yourself. My wish is your command. I could simply wish for you to spend every single day facing the wall without eating or sleeping. Theoharis immediately complained, that's so mean. Why did someone like you have to summon me? He grumbled in frustration while staring at her. Still, she could not help but admit to herself that he was incredibly handsome. Honestly, taking care of this guy would probably be much more rewarding than wasting her time chasing the crown prince around. Looking directly at him, she called out, "Dioharis." "She's so evil," he muttered quietly to himself. Then he sighed before saying, "Just call me Harry." She smiled and replied, "All right." "Hi, Harry. I have another wish." "Oh no. I wasn't even thinking about fighting behind your back. Please don't make me stare at the wall," he pleaded dramatically. She shook her head before answering, "It's not that. Don't kill me. Protect me." Harry immediately frowned before saying, "That's a stupid wish. I can't kill my master anyway." "You can't leave me to die either," she pointed out. "Oh, and so? Now what?" he asked as he sat back down in his chair. She looked at him carefully before saying, "Can you change your appearance a little? You're so handsome that people will notice you from a mile away." In an instant, he proudly transformed before asking, "Oh, so you really think I'm handsome?" She looked confused by his reaction before replying, "Why are you so surprised? I'm sure you've heard that countless times." "Well, you looked completely unfazed when you first saw me, so I thought you didn't recognize my beauty," he answered proudly. All right. So you want me to be less noticeable, right?" In the world of demons, every demon possessed a familiar that was connected directly to their soul, allowing them to transform into that familiar whenever necessary. A bright flash of light filled the room, and moments later, the mighty demon of the azure flame had transformed into a beautiful white dog. Looking up at her proudly, the little dog asked, "So, what do you think of my power?" Iviria stared at him for a moment before gently reaching out to pet his soft fur. "Well, I mean, you're very cute." Harry immediately barked in protest. "How dare you treat me like an ordinary dog?" Then he tilted his head before asking, "So how exactly are you going to explain that fire to everyone else?" Iviria answered confidently, "I am a magician." Harry froze completely before replying, "But the amount of mana you have is only about 0.5. "That's right," she admitted. "Magicians use magic by controlling the mana within their bodies. The greater the amount of mana a person possesses, the more powerful and skilled their magic becomes. However, everyone is born with a fixed amount of mana that can never be increased or changed. A person's mana is measured immediately after birth, and Iviria had been born with a mana level of only 0.5%. That amount was barely enough to light a single candle. On the other hand, Catherine possessed an overwhelming mana level of 9, making her one of the most gifted magicians in the kingdom. Even so, Iviria simply shrugged before saying, "It's not like anyone can argue if I insist that I did it myself. After all, I am the Duke's daughter." Harry stared at her in disbelief before muttering, "There's absolutely no way people are going to believe something like that." A few moments later, servants gathered around the blazing fireplace, their eyes widening in complete astonishment. Seriously, they actually believed it? Harry thought to himself in disbelief. "You're amazing, my lady. I can't believe the black steel logs are actually burning." One servant excitedly shouted, "We don't have to live at the mercy of those greedy merchants anymore." Another happily exclaimed. They were all so overjoyed by the warmth filling the mansion that no one questioned anything else. Harry remained speechless while Iviria awkwardly smiled before saying, "Oh, it was nothing. I simply prayed very desperately, and somehow it worked. After all, I am a magician." One of the servants hesitated before saying, "But the amount of mana you have." "Oh, never mind." Then another maid noticed the fluffy white dog and asked, "More importantly, my lady, where did this dog come from?" They really bought that ridiculous explanation, Iviria thought in amazement. "Oh, this dog? I found him outside. I think he's a stray, so I've decided to keep him." Harry let out a small woof in response. One of the maids cautiously suggested, "Wouldn't you prefer a smaller dog instead?" Iviria immediately picked Harry up in her arms before answering firmly, "I like this one. I don't want any other dog." The servants exchanged glances before finally nodding. "Well, if you say so, my lady. Let's first see if anyone has reported losing a dog. If no one comes to claim him, then you may certainly keep him." Suddenly, the doors burst open as someone rushed inside. "What?" Iviria asked in surprise. "Who's crying?" An elderly man stepped forward with tears streaming down his face before saying, "My lady, this is nothing short of a miracle. It must be because of your kind heart. You tried your very best to bring warmth back to this territory despite having such a tiny amount of mana. Because of you, we no longer have to pay those outrageous prices for firewood." Iviria stood there completely stunned. I was just cold, that's all," she thought awkwardly. The old man continued with tears in his eyes. We were complete fools for believing all those terrifying rumors about you. Please forgive us. Iveria immediately shook her head before saying, No. There's nothing to forgive. Hearing those words, the old man smiled gratefully before saying, How merciful you truly are, my lady. We shall go and share this warmth with everyone else in the mansion. Everyone will be incredibly grateful to you. As everyone hurried away, Iveria stood there feeling slightly overwhelmed before quietly saying to herself, Okay, I guess this is a good thing, right? Meanwhile, inside the study of Baron Insentia, the administrator of Erel, the recent events were being carefully analyzed. A fire capable of burning black steel wood. She may be trying to hide it, but this must undoubtedly be Lady Iveria's true power. She has always been known to possess almost no mana, meaning ordinary magic should have been completely impossible for her. If that is the case, then it must have been Duke Oberon's decision to conceal her true abilities all this time. The Oberon family possessed influence and authority rivaling even that of the royal family itself. If a child blessed with overwhelming magical power had been born into House Oberon, it could easily have ignited an entirely new political conflict throughout the kingdom. But why would His Grace keep such an extraordinary secret hidden until now? Perhaps this is all part of a test for Lady Iveria, the legendary flame of the north. I can sense the birth of a new fire. A flame that will drive away every hardship is finally about to ignite within the northernmost region of Erel. During the middle of the night, as Iveria slept peacefully with the little white dog curled up beside her, Harry quietly opened his eyes. After making sure she was completely asleep, he transformed back into his human form and looked down at her before softly muttering, Did she really fall asleep? Well, this is a first. A few moments later, he remembered what had happened earlier. As he had tried to make himself comfortable, Iveria had complained, Harry, move. I need to sleep. He had innocently replied in his dog form, I don't want to sleep on the couch. She had immediately frowned and asked, Why are you acting like a real dog? You're a demon, for crying out loud. Thinking back to that exchange, Harry could not help but smile faintly. She had been so cautious and fierce when they first met, yet despite all of that, she was still just a young girl at heart. Slowly reaching out, he gently brushed his fingers against her sleeping hand while quietly whispering, I wonder what it is that you truly desire. Of course, you said you don't need anything right now. But the day I discover the deepest desire rooted inside your heart, I'm sure that feeling will be absolutely delightful. As though responding to his touch, Iveria unconsciously curled her fingers slightly around his hand before relaxing once more in her sleep. Just then, the faint sound of rattling echoed from somewhere outside the room. Harry's expression instantly turned serious as his sharp senses picked up the unfamiliar noise. His eyes narrowed toward the bedroom door, which had slowly begun to creak open ever so slightly. Without wasting another second, he quickly nudged Iveria awake. You need to get up, he whispered urgently. Still half asleep, she rubbed her eyes before asking, What's wrong? Harry immediately answered, Someone is in the living room. Maybe it's an assassin. Iveria blinked for a moment before replying, Who would send an assassin all the way out here? She paused for a second before letting out a sigh. On second thought, I suppose that's actually possible. I am Iveria after all. Wasting no more time, she carefully stepped out of her bedroom with Harry, who had already transformed back into his small white dog form. As she entered the living room, she noticed someone crouching in front of the fireplace, desperately reaching toward the burning logs. Iveria immediately spoke up. What are you doing here? The startled maid nearly jumped out of her skin before spinning around in panic. My lady! The moment she recognized Iveria, she dropped to her knees in terror and cried out, You're Emma, wasn't it? Iveria asked calmly. Please don't kill me. Emma screamed while trembling uncontrollably. Iveria and Harry exchanged confused glances before she quietly looked down at the little dog and asked, Was I really that scary just now? Harry tilted his head before replying, A little bit. Emma immediately lowered her head again and desperately apologized. I'm sorry. I was just so desperate that I couldn't think of anything else except stealing. Iveria looked at her curiously before asking, What exactly were you trying to steal? Emma hesitated for a moment before lowering her eyes in embarrassment. Well, never mind. Just take it, Iveria replied casually. Emma looked up in complete disbelief. Pardon? Iveria shrugged before continuing, The things inside this mansion aren't all that important to me. And you said you were desperate, didn't you? Then it doesn't really matter what you take. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she nervously asked, Are you sure I can take some of the fire? Iveria blinked in confusion. Huh? The fire? Emma immediately lowered her head again and whispered, I knew you would say no. Iveria frowned slightly before replying, Didn't the butler take some fire from this fireplace earlier today so it could be shared with everyone else? Emma shook her head sadly before explaining, Baron Insentia has forbidden all of the servants from taking any fire outside this mansion. Even inside the mansion, fireplaces are only lit where absolutely necessary. Hearing that explanation, Iveria quietly thought to herself that the Baron probably had a reasonable explanation for making such a decision. Even so, she could not ignore the situation in front of her. But that can't possibly be more important than saving people from freezing to death. Besides, I'm sure the Baron won't make a fuss over me using the fire however I want. She then looked directly at Emma before smiling. Lead the way, Emma. Emma immediately stood up and guided Iveria through the mansion until they reached the main gate. Pointing toward the entrance, Emma nervously whispered, There's a guard standing at the gate, my lady. Let's go, Iveria replied confidently. Emma looked incredibly nervous before quietly saying, My lady. As soon as they approached, the guard noticed them and quickly stepped forward. My lady? What's going on? Iveria smiled politely before asking, It must be difficult standing guard at this hour, isn't it? The guard's eyes widened in surprise. My lady! Open the gate. I need to go out for a walk, Iveria ordered. A walk? At this hour? The guard asked in complete confusion. Iveria casually pointed toward Harry before saying, He insisted on it, you see. The guard immediately smiled awkwardly before replying, If that's the case, I can take him out for you instead. Before he could take another step, Harry suddenly lunged forward and bit the guard on the leg. Iveria immediately smacked the little dog on the head and scolded him. Harry! Bad dog! Back! Then she looked apologetically at the guard before saying, As you can see, he doesn't obey anyone except me. The guard nervously rubbed his leg before replying, But Baron Insentia specifically ordered that no one is allowed to leave the mansion, and it's already very late. Iveria's expression instantly turned cold as she slowly glared at him. How dare you stand in my way? Her voice echoed through the night with such overwhelming pressure that the poor guard turned completely pale. He began trembling so violently that it looked as though he might faint at any second. Iveria could not help but wonder if she truly looked that terrifying. The frightened guard immediately bowed his head and cried out, I'll move out of your way. So please don't cut off my fingers. Fingers? Iveria repeated in complete confusion. Emma leaned closer and quietly whispered into her ear, There's a rumor that your favorite hobby is collecting people's fingers. Iveria stared at her in disbelief before asking, Whatever for? Emma nervously shook her head. I wouldn't know, my lady. Iveria sighed deeply before replying, Well, I don't know either, because I definitely don't collect fingers. Emma's eyes grew even wider. Oh my goodness, you don't? She asked in complete shock. A moment later, the guard hurriedly opened the gate for them. Iveria stepped outside with Emma and Harry before calmly saying, Emma, lead the way. Behind them, the guard continued standing there, looking incredibly anxious and conflicted. Suddenly, he shouted, Wait for me. He quickly ran after them. Iveria turned around in surprise before asking, Why are you following us? The guard scratched the back of his head awkwardly before replying, It's really late at night. So, it's dangerous. Iveria looked at him with amusement before asking, If it's really that dangerous, wouldn't it be a bad idea for you to abandon your post? The guard immediately froze in horror as he slowly looked back and realized he had left the gate standing wide open behind him. His face instantly turned pale as tears began streaming down his cheeks. What should I do? He cried in despair. Iveria simply sighed before saying, Stop crying and just come with us. If you get into trouble later, tell everyone that I dragged you along. The guard looked at her with overwhelming gratitude before lowering his head and quietly saying, My lady. Thank you. Poorhouse. This was the very place where Emma had grown up. Looking around at the worn-out building with sadness in her eyes, Emma quietly explained that if the people living here had been adults, they would have somehow managed to survive on their own no matter how harsh the winter became. But the ones living here were only children. They had no way of protecting themselves from the freezing cold. As she slowly pushed the old wooden door open, Iveria looked inside before softly calling out, Emma? Is this where you grew up? Standing beside her in his little white dog form, Harry glanced around the miserable shelter before calmly saying, looking at this place, it wouldn't be surprising if a few of them had already frozen to death. Hearing Emma's familiar voice, several children suddenly looked up with excitement. Emma! They cried out happily. Yes, it's me, Emma replied warmly as she stepped inside. Everia silently observed the scene before looking toward Harry and quietly admitting, I agree with you. Then she turned toward the guard and gave an order. Lionel, stack those logs inside the fireplace. Yes, my lady, Lionel immediately answered before carrying the black steel logs toward the old fireplace. Ta-da! Black steel wood. I picked it up on the way here. Emma looked at the logs before saying with concern, my lady, this wood doesn't catch fire. Everia smiled confidently before replying, don't worry. There's a way. While Emma continued speaking with the children, they suddenly noticed the unfamiliar noblewoman standing quietly behind her. The moment their eyes met Everia's, the children immediately became frightened. One after another, they hid behind Emma, and before long, several of them had already burst into tears. Everia stood there awkwardly before silently wondering to herself, do I really look that evil? Seeing the frightened children, Emma quickly hugged the youngest one in her arms and gently comforted them. It's all right, everyone. My lady isn't going to hurt you. Everything is all right. Everia slowly walked toward the fireplace as everyone in the room turned their attention toward her. Every pair of eyes was fixed on her, waiting to see what would happen next. Then suddenly, whack! Crash! One of the children accidentally stumbled forward, crashing into Everia. She lost her balance for just a split second, causing the lantern she had been carrying to slip from her hand. It hit the floor with a loud crash before rolling across the room. The flame immediately went out. For a brief moment, absolute silence filled the entire orphanage. No one spoke. No one moved. The warmth they had all been waiting for had disappeared in an instant. Emma slowly looked toward the extinguished lantern before tears immediately welled up in her eyes. The fire Our Lady brought for us. Suddenly, she began sobbing uncontrollably. Large tears streamed down her cheeks as she cried harder and harder. Seeing Emma cry, the children became frightened and immediately started crying as well. We're so sorry, Emma. Please don't cry. They pleaded through their tears. Everia watched the heartbreaking scene unfold before gently saying, Emma, the children are crying because you're crying. But the fire. Everyone is going to freeze to death now. Emma cried desperately. Everia let out a quiet sigh before lowering her eyes toward the little white dog standing beside her. Harry, please light the fire. Harry looked around at the crowded room before hesitating. Are you sure? There are a lot of people watching us. Everia slowly looked toward the shivering children who were desperately clinging to Emma while trying to stay warm. There was no hesitation left in her heart. There's no choice. I can't ignore them. Especially not after everything I've seen. Harry quietly nodded before stepping forward. In the next instant, his body was engulfed in a brilliant light as he transformed back into his handsome human form. Looking toward Everia with complete loyalty, he softly said, As you wish. He gently snapped his fingers. Instantly, brilliant flames burst to life inside the fireplace, burning the impossible black steel wood as though it were ordinary firewood. Warmth quickly spread throughout the orphanage, filling every corner of the room. Everyone stood frozen in complete disbelief. Their eyes widened as they stared at the blazing fire before slowly turning toward Everia. The children looked at her with sparkling eyes before asking in amazement, Are you a magician? Everia simply placed a finger against her lips before smiling gently. It's a secret, all right? The children happily nodded all at once before cheerfully replying, Okay. Turning toward Emma and Lionel, Everia added, I suggest the two of you keep this a secret as well. Yes, my lady. They both answered without hesitation. Everia then smiled faintly before saying, Shall we head back now? Emma, you can come again tomorrow. Emma's eyes filled with gratitude as she lowered her head deeply. Thank you very much, my lady. As Emma remained behind with the children, Everia, Harry, and Lionel slowly began walking back toward the mansion. Suddenly, Everia noticed something lying on the ground and called out, Lionel, you forgot your sword. Lionel quickly picked it up before looking silently at Everia. All his life, he had heard terrifying rumors about the Duke's daughter. When he first learned that he would be serving Lady Everia, he had been terrified. But tonight, he had witnessed something entirely different. She had willingly revealed a secret that could have endangered her, all to save complete strangers she had never even met before. Meanwhile, Emma watched Aviria's departing figure with tears still lingering in her eyes before silently making a vow deep within her heart. I, Emma, will devote myself to serving you for the rest of my life. The following day arrived peacefully. My lady! Did you sleep well? How was your meal? Good afternoon, my lady. Good morning, my lady. Everywhere Aviria walked, servants greeted her enthusiastically one after another. My lady! My lady! My lady! Their cheerful voices echoed throughout the mansion as they smiled warmly at her. Completely overwhelmed by the sudden change in everyone's attitude, Aviria hurried down the hallway, avoiding eye contact before quickly retreating into her room. The moment the door closed behind her, she leaned against it with an exhausted expression. What's going on? Why is everyone suddenly being so nice to me? She shouted in complete confusion. The maid standing inside the room smiled politely before answering, Well, that's because everyone has so much to thank you for his residence of Exiled. Earlier that very morning, Aviria had questioned Baron and Cynthia. Why aren't you sharing the fire with the residents of Exiled? Unless you have a particular objection, I suggest we send the fire to the entire village. The Baron had respectfully lowered his head before replying, If that is your wish, my lady, we will begin sharing the fire with the people of Exiled immediately. It shall be carried out exactly as you ordered. Returning to the present, the maid smiled warmly before continuing, You have no idea how grateful everyone is, my lady. The people are finally beginning to see your true character. Aviria quietly lowered her gaze before softly replying, I see. I suppose that's already a good thing. The maid then politely asked, Shall I bring you some tea, my lady? As she turned toward the door and reached for the handle, someone knocked from the other side. She opened the door and briefly spoke to the visitor before returning inside. Aviria, who had been watching the entire exchange with curiosity, finally asked, What is it? The maid turned toward her with a surprised expression before respectfully saying, My lady, His Highness, Crown Prince Cashin, has come to see you. Aviria's eyes instantly widened in complete shock. Huh? Even after we broke off our engagement, he actually came all the way here to see me? Aviria thought in complete disbelief. Her mind immediately drifted back to the day their engagement had come to an end. She could still clearly remember herself saying, I hope we never see each other again. Why don't we just call off our engagement? I'll even leave high society and live quietly. She paused for a moment as another thought crossed her mind. Did this ever happen in the original story? Since the novel had always been centered around Catherine, even if something like this had happened, it probably would have been completely skipped over without ever being mentioned. Let us just hope this isn't anything serious. Moments later, the door slowly opened, and standing there was none other than Crown Prince Cashin. Looking at her with his usual charming smile, he greeted her. It has been a long time, Lady Aviria. You seem to be in much better health here than when you were in the capital. His perfectly styled hair shimmered under the sunlight, and his expensive attire practically announced his royal status to everyone around him. Aviria quietly thought to herself, You came here in secret? So much for that. Anyone who takes one look at the way you're dressed could immediately tell your royalty. Keeping her composure, she calmly asked, Why did you want to see me? Cashin smiled confidently before replying, Seeing how well you have adjusted to life in the countryside is quite surprising. You are Aviria Oberon after all. It is even harder to believe that you are doing so well without me by your side. Aviria stared at him in complete disbelief. What is wrong with him? She wondered. Finally growing impatient, she sighed before saying, That's quite enough joking, Your Highness. Why are you really here? Cashin stepped forward with complete confidence before answering, Of course I came here to see you. I know you're pretending to be perfectly fine, but I cannot even imagine how lonely you must have been without me. Aviria's eyes widened for just a moment before she finally understood everything. So this was how he had manipulated the original Aviria all along. Poor Aviria had been so hopelessly blinded by love that she willingly gave him everything he ever asked for without questioning his intentions. Unfortunately for him, he had arrived far too late. Things were different now. Besides, when it came to looks alone, Harry was far more handsome than he could ever hope to be. Without saying a word, Aviria casually picked up Harry in his little white dog form and held him protectively in front of herself. Thinking about how heartbroken you must have been, I came here to comfort you, Cashin continued confidently. Aviria answered without the slightest hesitation. I'm afraid you've completely wasted your time. I am Aviria Oberon. Calling off a simple engagement doesn't affect me in the slightest. As she turned away from him, Cashin suddenly stood up and desperately called out, Eve. Iveria silently frowned. Resorting to cute little nicknames now, are we? Cashin lowered his voice before continuing. I never thought I would truly fall in love with someone. That is why I continued our engagement all this time. But when I met Catherine, I realized I couldn't imagine marrying anyone except her. Iveria looked back at him with a completely blank expression before asking, so, do you want my blessing or something? Cashin's face immediately brightened. Yes, exactly that. I would like you to bless our future together. Iveria stared at him in absolute disbelief. What kind of nonsense is that? Cashin confidently walked closer before saying, I'm sure you would gladly do that. Right? What the hell is wrong with this guy? Iveria thought in complete disbelief. Before she could react, Cashin reached forward and gently touched her face. Eve, your father has withdrawn his support from my mining business. As Iveria instinctively stepped backward, Cashin reached out once again, this time gently brushing a strand of her hair between his fingers. That has placed me in quite a difficult position. If you cooperate with me, I may not be able to make you my queen anymore, but I can certainly give you something else. Long ago, on the eastern side of the kingdom, there had been a magic stone mine that remained completely undeveloped for many years. Experts had predicted that it contained an enormous amount of valuable magic stones, but the overwhelming development costs had prevented anyone from beginning the project. Crown Prince Cashin had hoped to develop that mine with the financial backing of the Oberon family so that he could strengthen his political position and secure his place as the future king. Naturally, after Iveria herself had called off the engagement, Duke Oberon immediately withdrew every bit of support from Cashin's business ventures. So that's why he came all the way here in such a hurry, Iveria realized. But honestly, I doubt that cold-hearted Duke would change his mind even if his own daughter begged him. And the condition he's trying to offer me is... Before Cashin could move any closer, an angry voice suddenly echoed throughout the room. You wretched son of a misbegotten ass. How dare you speak to my master like that? It was Harry. Still in his little white dog form, he barked with all the strength he could muster. The sudden outburst startled Cashin so badly that he completely lost his balance and crashed onto the floor. Looking completely confused, he blinked several times while trying to understand what had just happened. Iveria looked down at Harry in surprise before asking, Wow, what are you doing, Harry? Harry simply glared at Cashin without saying another word. Cashin slowly climbed back to his feet, still looking utterly bewildered. What just happened? Iveria looked directly at him before calmly saying, Your Highness, I have absolutely no idea what made you think I would be delighted by such an offer. Well, I suppose this is a good opportunity to tell you something. I don't find you attractive at all. Oh, and one more thing. Begging would have been a much better way to get what you wanted. Completely humiliated, Cashin turned around and stormed out of the room. As soon as he reached the hallway, he angrily shouted toward the royal guards waiting outside. We're going back to the capital. Iveria casually stood by the doorway before politely saying, Excuse me for not seeing you out. At that very moment, Cashin suddenly stumbled awkwardly, completely lost his footing, and crashed forward. Your Highness, are you alright? The guards shouted in panic as they rushed toward him. Everyone nearby looked on in complete shock as the crown prince nearly tumbled down the staircase. Iveria quietly looked toward Harry before asking, Did you do that as well? Harry simply looked back at her before replying, What do you think? Without another word, Iveria leaned down, gently picked Harry up in her arms, and planted a grateful kiss on his fluffy little face. Thank you. Harry instantly froze. His eyes widened as a bright blush spread across his face. What? He stammered, completely flustered. Meanwhile, below the staircase, the royal guards struggled to help the embarrassed crown prince back onto his feet. Looking down at the miserable sight from the balcony above, Iveria smiled ever so slightly before saying, You must be very tired these days to be stumbling around like that. But don't worry. Lacking stamina is nothing to be ashamed of. I sincerely wish you the very best of luck. As she stood inside her room stretching her arms after a long day, Iveria let out a satisfied sigh before smiling to herself. That felt really good. Resting comfortably with his head lying across her lap, Harry remained in his human form while lazily staring up at the ceiling. Looking at her with a slight pout, he suddenly asked, Are you happy? Iveria nodded without hesitation before replying, Of course. I finally got rid of that annoying man. Harry slowly turned his head toward her and answered in a disappointed voice, Really? I see. It must be nice feeling happy when I'm not. Still pouting, he looked away dramatically. Everia casually reached for her teacup and took a small sip before smiling. Oh, the tea tastes really good. Harry immediately frowned before complaining, it must be nice that even the tea you didn't actually drink tastes good. Meanwhile, here I am, completely sad and depressed. Everia could not help but sigh. You always say the exact same thing. Harry suddenly leaned forward and began chewing on a strand of her long hair while grumbling. That's because I'm frustrated. I punished that prince for you, and I'm trying really hard to hold myself back from killing people. Yet you never even ask how I'm feeling or show any concern for me. Everia gently pulled her hair away from his mouth before saying, all right, stop chewing on my hair. Harry looked at her expectantly before asking once again, so, are you finally going to let me kill people now? Instead of answering, Everia simply smiled and gently stroked his head before patting him affectionately. Good job, Harry. Thank you. Harry immediately puffed up his cheeks in annoyance. Not this. Do you seriously think I'm just some kind of dog? Everia continued running her fingers through his soft hair before casually replying, your hair is really soft. Don't change the subject, Harry protested. I honestly don't think you have any idea just how incredible a demon I actually am. Everia smiled knowingly before answering, of course I do. You're going to have some more cake, aren't you? Harry immediately sat upright. No, you don't. Thanks. Ignoring his refusal completely, Everia placed another slice of cake in front of him anyway. Harry quietly accepted it before beginning to eat. I still do a lot for you, you know, he muttered through a mouthful of cake. Everia folded her arms before replying, haven't you noticed the shocked expressions on the maids' faces every single mealtime? They all think I have an enormous appetite because of how much food I ask them to prepare. When in reality, you're the one eating almost all of it. Harry shrugged without looking guilty in the slightest. Well, eating is the only way I can release some of my frustration. Everia tilted her head curiously. Is that really how it works? Harry nodded before explaining more seriously, killing is one of the most basic instincts of a demon. It's similar to how humans naturally crave food. We won't die just because we suppress those desires. But enduring them is unimaginably painful. Imagine having to survive for the rest of your life eating nothing but dog food. That's what it feels like. Everia's expression softened as she quietly replied, I see. Harry looked at her with a tired smile. It may not look like it, but you honestly have no idea how hard I'm trying to control myself. Everia thought quietly for a moment before asking, is there any other way for you to deal with it? Harry repeated her question to himself. Another way. He paused, thinking deeply. There is, isn't there? Everia immediately leaned closer, her curiosity growing. What is it? Come on, tell me. Harry suddenly became noticeably flustered as she leaned so close to him. Will. As long as I experience some kind of pleasure, that usually works too. An awkward silence instantly filled the room as neither of them spoke for several seconds. Everia looked at him with complete innocence before asking, so, what kind of pleasure are you talking about? Harry immediately looked away before awkwardly changing the subject. How old are you again? Everia answered honestly, I'll be 18 this year. Harry let out a small laugh before replying, yeah. Then it's something an infant like you wouldn't understand. Everia blinked in disbelief. Infant? Then how old are you? Harry proudly crossed his arms before answering, 2176. Everia stared at him in amazement before blurting out, wow, Harry. You're basically a grandpa. Grandpa? Harry immediately shouted in protest. Demons age completely differently from humans. Anyway, it's not something you can help me with. As Harry continued complaining, Everia's thoughts gradually drifted elsewhere. Her mind wandered toward the Raven Forest. Deep within the Raven Forest of the Arel territory existed the natural habitat of wyverns. These fierce dragon-like carnivores possess violent temperaments and had always been considered the natural enemies of humanity. Every year, before the warmer seasons arrived, their eggs had to be destroyed in order to keep their population under control before they hatched. Since cracking eggs that were fiercely protected by fully grown wyverns was an incredibly dangerous task, the royal family provided military support to the territory every single year. After all, if the northern trade route were ever attacked by those terrifying creatures, the royal family itself would also suffer significant losses. So, that's why they're here, Everia quietly realized. Two of Catherine's future companions had come all the way to this remote mountainous region specifically to participate in the wyvern hunt. Throughout the entire continent, everyone knew how terrible the relationship between the first prince, light and geraint, and Iveria had always been. And accompanying the expedition was none other than the captain of the royal guard, Eloitz. Iveria's relationship with him had never been good either. Knights valued honor, justice, discipline, law, and order above everything else. Meanwhile, Iveria was infamous throughout the kingdom as the wicked noblewoman who constantly plotted against others and had even attempted to murder Catherine. Naturally, someone like Eloitz could never think highly of her. Even so, because he was a true knight, he never openly displayed his personal dislike. Iveria quietly sighed to herself before deciding, anyway, I'll just stay inside my room until all of them leave. I'm staying in the main building while they're staying in the building across from mine. As long as I avoid going outside, our paths shouldn't cross. She shook her head with regret. I never should have let my guard down. Lady Iveria Oberon. I really shouldn't have listened to Emma. Unfortunately, fate had different plans. Before she even realized what was happening, she suddenly found herself standing face to face with the very people she had been trying so desperately to avoid. Her heart instantly sank. Ariel may be freezing cold, but it's also famous for its hot springs. Why don't you go and take a look? Emma had suggested so enthusiastically earlier. I even skipped the dinner banquet just so I wouldn't accidentally run into them like this, Iveria thought helplessly, but it was all completely pointless in the end. I really should have just stayed in my room. Iveria had never expected to run into them here of all places. Looking at the familiar faces standing before her, she remained outwardly calm and politely greeted them. I had no idea you would be here. I heard you were busy. Standing before her, Sir El calmly replied, well, we have not officially started our hunt yet, after all. His expression remained as unreadable as ever, but after a brief pause, he looked directly at Iveria before continuing, but you seem to be doing quite well despite all the trouble you caused back in the capital. Hearing those words, Iveria did not react in the slightest. Before she had ever reincarnated into this world, she had spent years working at a trading company in Korea. During those years, she had dealt with strict supervisors, demanding clients, and endless lectures over the smallest mistakes. Because of that experience, she had long since mastered the skill of silently ignoring people whenever they began nagging or criticizing her. Remaining completely expressionless, she simply listened without allowing a single word to affect her. Meanwhile, Harry, still disguised as an adorable little white dog, quietly let out a few irritated barks from beside her feet as if he already disliked where this conversation was heading. Sir El continued speaking without noticing Iveria's complete lack of interest. Just because you have hidden yourself away here does not mean the people in the capital have forgotten about what you did. What exactly are you plotting? Iveria answered in the calmest voice possible. Yes, of course. I understand. Certainly not. Her replies were so short and so emotionless that it became almost impossible to continue the conversation naturally. Inside, however, she quietly thought to herself that she had learned another useful lesson back in her previous life. Whenever she became completely unresponsive, most people eventually grew tired of talking and simply gave up. It was often the fastest way to end an unwanted conversation. Hoping that would happen here as well, she politely smiled before asking, if you were finished, may I take my leave now? I was actually on my way to the hot springs. Instead of ending the conversation, Sir El's expression visibly hardened. His frustration became impossible to hide as he suddenly raised his voice. How can you possibly think about relaxing in the hot springs after trying to ruin someone's life? Iveria let out a nearly inaudible sigh inside her mind. Ugh, he is still not done. Looking back at him without the slightest trace of anger, she calmly asked, Your Highness, was that person's life actually ruined? It seems you may have forgotten something rather important. That person was the woman my fiancé chose to have an affair with behind my back. Sir El opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. That is, Iveria quietly continued before he could recover. Not that I have any desire to involve myself with the Crown Prince anymore. That chapter of my life is already over. However, I am fully aware that my own actions were wrong. I do not deny that. That is precisely why I chose to leave everything behind and spend the rest of my life here in Ariel, quietly reflecting upon my mistakes. She paused for only a brief moment before asking another question. Or do you perhaps believe that someone like me is incapable of changing? Once wicked, always wicked? The question caught Sir El completely off guard. For the first time since their conversation had begun, he seemed genuinely uncertain. His confident expression gradually weakened as he struggled to answer. After a long silence, he finally spoke. As a citizen of this kingdom, I am simply concerned. Iveria looked at him steadily before replying in an equally calm voice. Then I cannot help but feel concerned myself. A prince who is destined to rule an entire kingdom should judge every citizen fairly and without prejudice. Yet you seem to have already decided who I am without allowing for even the slightest possibility that a person could change. If those entrusted with protecting justice refuse to believe in redemption, then who possibly will? Her words were spoken without anger or resentment. They were simple, honest, and impossible to dismiss. Sir L remained completely silent. For perhaps the first time since meeting Iveria, he found himself unable to argue against her reasoning. Without waiting for another response, Iveria politely bowed her head before saying, "If you will excuse me, Your Highness." With that, she quietly turned around and walked away, leaving both Sir L and his companion standing there in complete silence. Neither of them attempted to stop her this time. As she calmly disappeared from sight, Iveria silently let out a long breath of relief. At least that exhausting conversation was finally over. All she wanted now was a peaceful visit to the famous hot springs of Erel, far away from unnecessary misunderstandings and troublesome people. By the time Iveria finally reached the famous hot springs of Erel, the irritation from her earlier encounter had already begun to melt away. The comforting warmth embraced her entire body the moment she stepped into the water, causing every bit of tension she had been carrying to slowly disappear. Leaning back comfortably against the smooth stone behind her, she closed her eyes for a brief moment before letting out a long, satisfied sigh. This is nice. Now this is exactly what I was talking about. It had been a long time since she had been able to relax this peacefully. After everything that had happened since her reincarnation, from breaking off her engagement to leaving the capital, dealing with nobles, surviving the freezing weather of Erel, summoning a demon, and even becoming the accidental savior of the territory, she finally felt as though she had earned a moment to simply enjoy herself. Opening her eyes again, she glanced around before noticing Harry sitting far away on the roof of a nearby building. Rather than remaining in his little white dog form, he had transformed back into his human appearance and was casually sitting with one leg crossed over the other, looking as relaxed as ever. Iveria tilted her head in confusion before calling out to him. "Hey, Harry, why are you sitting all the way over there?" Harry lazily glanced in her direction before replying, "I'm comfortable here." Iveria frowned slightly. "You're so far away that we can barely even have a conversation face to face." Harry simply shrugged as though the distance did not bother him in the slightest. "Harry! Come over here and join me," she called out once again. He immediately shook his head. "I already told you I'm perfectly fine where I am." Iveria narrowed her eyes suspiciously before a mischievous smile slowly spread across her face. "Wait a second. Is this because you're embarrassed?" The moment those words reached him, Harry noticeably flinched. Although he tried to hide it, his reaction was obvious enough to answer the question for her. Iveria could no longer hold back her laughter. "Harry, you're actually pretty innocent for someone who's basically a grandpa." Harry's face immediately darkened as he glared at her from the rooftop. "I already told you. I'm not a grandpa." His voice echoed through the quiet hot spring as Iveria continued laughing even harder. No matter how many times he denied it, hearing that a demon who claimed to be over 2,000 years old was offended by being called a grandpa was simply too amusing. Finally losing his patience, Harry stood up and stepped closer without another word. Iveria looked at him curiously. "Let's go," Harry suddenly said. Before she could even ask what he meant, he leaned down and effortlessly slipped one arm beneath her knees while supporting her back with the other. In one smooth motion, he lifted her completely out of the hot spring and into his arms as though she weighed almost nothing at all. Iveria's eyes widened in surprise. She instinctively looked up at him as he continued carrying her so effortlessly. For just a brief moment, their eyes met. Then something incredible happened. She suddenly realized that the water covering her body had completely disappeared. There was not a single drop remaining. Looking down at herself in complete amazement, she softly exclaimed, "So soft. Wow, I'm completely dry." She looked back at Harry with genuine curiosity. "You can do something like this too?" Harry smiled proudly before replying, "Yep, with magic." Vaporizing water using heat sounds simple, but you actually need an extremely high level of mana to pull it off properly. Iveria listened carefully before nodding in admiration. "Wow, you're basically just like a blow dryer." Harry blinked in confusion. "Blow dryer? Who's that?" Iveria could not help but laugh. "It's not a person. It's an object. People use it to dry their hair after taking a bath." Harry thought about her explanation very seriously. "So, If someone can dry people using heat, they're called a blow dryer? Iveria nodded casually. Something like that. Harry immediately puffed out his chest with overwhelming pride. Then that means I'm definitely the greatest blow dryer in the entire world. Nobody else could possibly do this as well as I can. Iveria stared at him for several long seconds before realizing there was absolutely no point trying to explain modern household appliances to someone who had lived for over 2,000 years in a fantasy world. She slowly let out a defeated sigh. No, that's really not. Never mind. Alright, let's just go with that. Yes, you are absolutely the greatest blow dryer in the entire world. Harry smiled with complete satisfaction, proudly accepting the compliment without realizing she had already surrendered the argument. Iveria simply looked away, completely unbothered by his misunderstanding. After getting dressed, the two of them quietly left the hot springs together. As always, Harry transformed back into his adorable little white dog form before following closely beside her. The peaceful atmosphere remained undisturbed as they walked through the estate together, with Iveria enjoying the cool evening breeze after the warmth of the spring. For a brief moment, everything felt calm again, and she almost believed the rest of the day would pass without another troublesome encounter. Standing there with his usual composed posture was Sir L. Loitz. The captain of the Royal Guard calmly acknowledged their presence. Without saying a single unnecessary word, he respectfully lowered his head in greeting before immediately turning around and continuing on his way. The entire encounter lasted only a few seconds. Iveria stood there blinking in confusion as she watched him disappear into the distance. Finally, she looked down at Harry and asked, "What was that?" Harry followed Sir L with his eyes before speaking. "Is that the descendant of the Lloyds family?" Iveria nodded. "That's him." Harry quietly observed the knight's retreating figure for another moment before smiling to himself. No wonder. He looks exactly like the man who stood beside that idiot who summoned me centuries ago. He's just as taciturn too. Hearing those words immediately reminded Iveria of the original novel. Even within the story itself, Sir L had never been particularly talkative. In fact, readers had jokingly created nicknames for him based on how many sentences he managed to speak within a single hour. If he only spoke once, they called him 1L. If he managed to say two things, he became 2L. On the rare occasions he spoke 3 times in an hour, people jokingly referred to him as 3L. 2L had always been considered his average. Harry suddenly let out an amused laugh as old memories resurfaced. I honestly thought his ancestor was mute the first time I met him. It took him 3 whole months before he finally said a single word to me. Iveria could not help smiling at the thought. Harry shook his head with amusement before continuing, "I suppose the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. It's actually quite funny when you think about it. The descendant of such a quiet man ended up just as quiet. Maybe giving up on talking is the true secret behind becoming a great swordsman." Iveria silently listened while Harry continued talking to himself. "And then there's the descendant of that fool. He's still every bit as foolish as his ancestor was." Iveria remained completely speechless as Harry casually insulted both the royal family and their ancestors as though he were commenting on the weather. After a brief moment, she looked down at him before smiling faintly. "Harry, you seem surprisingly fond of Sir L. I'm starting to feel a little jealous." Harry answered without even thinking about it. "Of course I like him. He's strong. Strong humans are always interesting. They have ambition. They struggle. They continue growing stronger. That's far more entertaining to watch than someone who simply lives a peaceful life." Iveria folded her arms before looking at him with mock disappointment. "So because I'm weak, I'm not interesting?" Harry glanced up at her before shrugging his tiny shoulders. "You're no fun because you don't have any ambition." Iveria looked toward the evening sky for a moment before smiling mischievously. "Then what would you think if I suddenly decided I wanted to conquer the entire world?" Harry's eyes lit up immediately. "Now that would be interesting." Iveria laughed softly before shaking her head. "I think I'll just remain boring." Harry let out a disappointed sigh as though she had just rejected the greatest idea imaginable. As the evening gradually turned into night, the mansion became peaceful once again. The long and eventful day had finally come to an end. Iveria slowly made her way back toward her room while stretching her arms and trying to fight off another yawn. The relaxing hot spring had completely drained what little energy she still had left. Passing through the hallway, she came across Emma, who immediately stopped what she was doing and respectfully greeted her. Iveria smiled tiredly before saying, "Emma, I'm really sleepy after taking that bath, so I'm going straight to bed now." Emma bowed her head respectfully. "Yes, my lady. I hope you have a good night. Iveria nodded before quietly entering her room. The moment she pushed open the bedroom door, however, the peaceful mood instantly disappeared. There, lying comfortably across the middle of her bed as though he owned the place, was Harry. He had transformed back into his handsome human form and looked completely relaxed while resting with his hands behind his head. Iveria froze in the doorway before staring at him in disbelief. After a few seconds, she finally spoke. What exactly are you doing on my bed? I'm really sleepy, so I'm not in the mood for your jokes. Please move. Harry looked at her with complete seriousness. There wasn't the slightest hint that he was joking. We always sleep together anyway. Iveria immediately rubbed her forehead. That's only when you're Harry the dog. Stop fooling around. Harry slowly sat upright before looking directly into her eyes. I'm not fooling around. Every single time I told you that I wanted to shed blood, I was being completely serious. Every single time, you ignored me. You brushed it aside as though it was nothing. So now, I'm going to teach you just how difficult it really is to suppress your desires. His voice remained calm, but there was a seriousness behind his words that was impossible to ignore. Unfortunately for him, Iveria was simply too exhausted to process any of it. Her eyelids had become so heavy that she could barely keep them open. She let out another sleepy yawn before mumbling, Harry, I really do want to hear you out. I honestly do. But I'm so sleepy. Clutching her pillow tightly against her chest, she slowly staggered away from the bed with half-closed eyes. Harry watched her in complete confusion. Where are you going? Without even turning around, Iveria quietly replied, Good night, Harry. Instead of arguing any further, she walked over to the couch in the corner of the room, placed her pillow down, curled herself into a comfortable position, and within only a few moments had already fallen completely asleep. Her breathing soon became slow and peaceful as though nothing unusual had happened at all. Harry remained sitting motionless on the bed, staring silently at the sleeping Iveria. This isn't what I had in mind, he thought to himself. He had imagined an entirely different outcome, yet somehow everything had once again gone in a direction he had never expected. Running a hand through his hair in growing frustration, he let out a long sigh before quietly muttering to himself, Master, I don't think I can hold back much longer. As the fire in the fireplace crackled softly, the warm glow illuminated the quiet room. Iveria slowly opened her eyes and immediately noticed Harry lying on top of her while she was still half asleep. Letting out a tired sigh, she looked at him before asking, Harry, is this your plan B? Without waiting for an answer, she pushed him away and complained, No matter how much you bother me, I'm not going to start a war. You're heavy, so please move. Harry. As she looked at him more carefully, something immediately felt different. His breathing was uneven, and his expression seemed strangely absent. Harry, can you hear me? Are you all right? Before she could react, Harry suddenly reached out, gently grabbed her face, and pulled it closer to his own. His eyes looked hazy as he muttered, It's too hard. The next moment, his body slumped against hers as he wrapped his arms around her. Instead of letting go, he buried his face against her neck, rubbing against it while lightly nibbling at her skin. Harry, don't say I didn't warn you. Snap out of it. Iveria shouted before smacking him across the head. Ouch! That hurts! Harry immediately cried out as he rubbed the spot she had hit. What was that for? Iveria stared at him before asking, Are you finally awake now? Then she pointed directly at her neck. Why would you call yourself innocent after trying to eat me alive? Just look at my neck. Harry's eyes widened in shock. Me? I did that. Don't you remember? She asked. Harry slowly shook his head. Not at all. Looking at the marks on her neck with complete confusion, he muttered, Why are my teeth marks on your neck? Seeing his expression, Iveria realized he genuinely had no memory of what had just happened. Harry let out a long sigh before saying, See? I told you. I warned you that I'd reached my limit. I honestly don't know what I'll end up doing next. Even so, how could you try to eat me alive? Iveria complained. My life is actually being threatened by a frustrated, cannibalistic demon. Just my luck. Harry lowered his head apologetically. I'm sorry. I'm not usually like that. It's just that I've never gone this long without shedding blood before. It's driving me completely insane. Iveria quietly thought for a moment before speaking. Then we should probably find another solution. Looking at Harry with a tired expression, she sighed. You're the highest maintenance match I've ever used. Harry immediately brightened. But I'm still the best blow dryer, right? Iveria could not help smiling. Yes, A very expensive and extremely high-maintenance one. Later, the two of them sat together as Averia searched through several old books while Harry casually sat on top of the table beside her. One after another, she flipped through titles discussing exact revenge, world conquest, and countless other methods used by those who summon demons. After reading for a while, she sighed. I can't use any of these methods. Harry lazily tossed one of the books back onto the table before asking, why are demons always summoned for things like this? Revenge. World conquest. That's the normal reason. You're the strange one for summoning a demon just to light a fireplace. Averia nodded before replying, maybe. But none of these ideas solve our current problem. Harry folded his arms. Then let's just start a war. It's the simplest solution. Averia immediately frowned. Can you stop being so counterproductive when I'm actually trying to help you? Harry smirked mischievously. You're not doing this for me. You're only doing it because you don't want to get eaten. Well, of course, Averia answered without hesitation. Who in their right mind would want to be eaten alive by a demon? Harry looked at her before asking, you do realize I wasn't talking about eating you like ordinary food, right? Averia blinked. Then, what exactly were you talking about? Suddenly another thought crossed her mind. Oh, is it my blood? Not my flesh? If it's blood, I can give you some. Do you want some right now? Harry immediately covered his face in frustration. What's wrong? Averia asked innocently. Forget it, Harry muttered. There's no point explaining something like this to an infant. Averia poked him on the forehead. Why are you pouting after I literally offered you my blood? Before Harry could answer, Averia happened to glance out of the window. Outside, she saw the royal knights gathered together while cheering around Sir El. So, today's the day they leave for the wyvern hunt, she quietly realized. Emma mentioned it would take around a month. A whole month? Harry casually replied, wyverns can only be hunted when there's enough sunlight. They're usually hunted during the afternoon, so that's why it takes so long. Averia immediately sighed. Then that means I'll have to stay inside my room the entire time if I don't want to keep running into them. A thought suddenly crossed her mind. Wait, aren't wyverns supposed to be incredibly strong? She turned toward Harry with curiosity. Harry, aren't wyverns difficult to hunt? Harry nodded. They are. At least for humans. The best they can usually do is destroy the eggs while the adult wyverns are away from the nest. Averia looked at him thoughtfully before asking, then what about you? Are they difficult for you to deal with as well? Harry smiled confidently. Master, you really have no idea how powerful an archmage truly is. Averia's eyes suddenly lit up. Well, that's good to hear. Harry tilted his head in confusion. Why? Averia immediately stood up with a determined smile. Harry, let's get ready for war. At that very moment, deep within the mountains, one of the knights hurriedly ran towards Sir El while breathing heavily. Captain, you need to come and see this immediately. Sir El followed him to one of the wyvern nests. The moment they arrived, everyone froze in complete disbelief. The once dangerous nest was completely silent. The wyverns had already been slaughtered. The knights could only stare at the horrifying sight in stunned silence, unable to understand what had happened. This had been going on for an entire week. Wyverns were far from ordinary creatures. They were powerful, ferocious monsters that even experienced knights struggled to defeat. Yet somehow, every single day, more and more of them were being slaughtered without fail. Standing beside the latest scene, one of the knights reported, "This has been happening for a week now. Wyverns aren't easy creatures to kill, but they've been slaughtered every day. The search parties are still investigating the area, but we haven't found a single clue." Another knight frowned as he looked over the massive carcasses scattered across the ground. What could possibly be stronger than a wyvern? Don't you think we should request reinforcements from the capital? Sir Eloyds quietly examined the remains before shaking his head. I don't believe this is the work of a beast. The knight looked at him in confusion. Then what could it possibly be? Sir El crouched beside one of the dead wyverns and carefully inspected the burns covering its body. We found traces of fire on every wyvern carcass. Beasts don't use fire. If that's the case, we should assume that whatever is responsible possesses intelligence. And not just any intelligence, a very powerful one at that. The surrounding knights exchanged uneasy glances. So, do you believe there's a possibility that a human is behind all of this? Sir El remained silent as he considered the possibility. Not far away, another man quietly observed the scene with a thoughtful expression. It was Leiden Geraint, the first prince. His gaze lingered on Sir El for a moment. Sir Eloyds, He's a man of integrity who has always maintained a neutral position in political matters. I'm certain he has no hidden motives of his own. However, I'm not sure how the royal family will react to this unexpected development. Deep in thought, Leiden reflected on his own situation. According to the traditions of the Kingdom of Geraint, the eldest child was supposed to inherit the throne. But after his mother's death, Cashin had been appointed crown prince instead. Even so, many nobles who value tradition still believed Leiden should have been the rightful successor. Because of that, the queen constantly sought opportunities to place him in dangerous situations. I'm sure she arranged for me to participate in this hunt under Sir L's command in the hope that I'd make a mistake and be blamed for it. And now, with a mysterious being capable of slaughtering wyverns appearing out of nowhere, I wonder how this will change everything. Meanwhile, far away from the investigation, the true cause of the mysterious incidents was quietly watching the flames dance through the forest. Iveria sat nearby as Harry effortlessly burned another group of wyverns to ashes. She carefully observed him while he fought. Unlike his usual lazy and playful self, Harry looked genuinely excited. Every movement he made seemed effortless, and every burst of azure flame completely overwhelmed the wyverns before they even had a chance to fight back. Watching him enjoy himself so much made Iveria realize something she had almost forgotten. Seeing him like this, I really did summon a demon. Harry casually tossed aside the remains of another defeated wyvern before dusting off his hands. Oh, shall we head back now? Iveria looked at him in surprise. You're finished already? But you usually want to stay longer. Harry scratched the back of his head awkwardly. Well, you seem kind of bored. Iveria blinked in surprise. Wow, so you finally started worrying about me after an entire week. Harry looked away before quietly admitting, well, you've been getting quieter every day. I was just worried that I might be scaring you. From a human's perspective, someone with my kind of power probably does seem frightening. But I really do cherish my master, so you don't have to be afraid of me. Iveria smiled gently before shaking her head. It's nothing like that. I'm just getting a little bored of waiting. Before she could finish her sentence, the ground suddenly trembled beneath their feet. A gigantic shadow descended between them, forcing Iveria to instinctively step backward. Towering over both of them stood an enormous wyvern unlike any she had ever seen before. Its body was several times larger than the others, and its overwhelming presence alone made the surrounding forest fall silent. Iveria stared at the enormous creature in shock. It's gigantic. Harry immediately stepped in front of her, wrapping one arm around her protectively. Harry, what's that thing doing here? Is it another wyvern? Harry nodded. Yes, it is. The gigantic wyvern slowly lowered its head before speaking in a deep voice. I, Wyvern Leader. Greetings, human. Greetings, demon. Iveria's eyes widened even further. Hello. I thought wyverns were nothing more than beasts. I didn't know they could talk. She quietly whispered to Harry. Harry answered just as quietly. Normally they can't. That one's different. It's a special existence. A mystical creature that's much older than I am. The ancient wyvern slowly leaned closer, its enormous eyes fixed on Harry. Demon, why kill my kind? Harry folded his arms without showing the slightest concern. Since when do demons need a reason to kill? Did you come all the way here just to argue about that? I thought your kind preferred staying in the south. The wyvern leader ignored Harry's question and instead turned its attention toward Iveria. Human master. Need reason. Answer me. Iveria suddenly felt extremely guilty. She had never expected to be questioned by a creature capable of speaking. If I had known something like this would happen, I would have searched for another solution from the beginning. She took a deep breath before stepping forward. Harry, let me handle this. Looking up at the enormous wyvern, she spoke honestly. I heard that demons go berserk if they can't satisfy their desire to kill. So, the only solution I could think of was using wyverns as a way for him to release that desire. The wyvern leader slowly shook its massive head. Desire. Release. There. Other. Solution. Iveria froze. Harry immediately interrupted. As if that would work. She's still an infant. Iveria looked at him in disbelief. I thought demons were supposed to protect the young ones like me. Harry shrugged. Demons do. The wyvern leader slowly lowered its gaze toward Iveria once more. Young human. Think wrong. But troublesome. Why? Make my kind extinct? Iveria lowered her eyes before answering honestly. Well, wyverns constantly attack our trade routes, and they prevent us from collecting lumber. To be honest, I did it because I believed they were causing too much suffering for too many people. I'm sorry. I never imagined your kind was capable of speaking or thinking like this. The wyvern leader quietly replied, cannot. Control. Trade route. Lumber. Stop. Everything. Young wyverns. Many die. My kind. Very sad. Harry clicked his tongue impatiently. I'm already having a hard enough time restraining myself, you know. Iveria quietly thought to herself, this is the only wyvern intelligent enough to speak like this. I know I should be worrying about Harry the most, but seeing a creature like this, it feels a little. Harry looked directly at her before raising his voice. Master, it's survival of the fittest. That's the law of nature. Iveria looked back and forth between Harry and the wyvern leader. The ancient creature wasn't glaring at her with hatred. Instead, it looked at her with an almost innocent expression, patiently waiting for her answer. After a long silence, Iveria finally made up her mind. Fine. Stop slaughtering them. Harry's eyes immediately widened in disbelief. Master. The wyvern leader slowly lowered its enormous head before speaking once more. The scale of the wyvern leader? Correct. Here. My scale. My kind recognize it. They follow your command, young human. As it spoke, one of its large scales drifted down before Iveria caught it in her hands. Looking at the shimmering scale with surprise, she asked, so the wyverns will recognize this scale and obey my orders? Correct, the ancient creature replied with a slow nod. Smart young human. Blue squirrel. Iveria blinked in confusion. Squirrel? Squirrel? Luminous squirrel. Unable to help herself, she burst into laughter. That's a compliment, right? Thank you. Absolutely, the wyvern leader answered sincerely before spreading its massive wings. I go now. Call. When needed. Starfish knows. Calling me. Harry immediately frowned and shouted after it. Wait. Who are you calling Starfish? The enormous wyvern paid no attention to his complaint. As it took flight into the sky, it simply replied, I come anytime. Gladly. Watching the gigantic creature disappear into the distance, Iveria let out a quiet sigh of relief. At least that ended peacefully. Harry, however, looked completely betrayed. Master, how could you do this to me? He cried dramatically. You took its side instead of mine. Iveria smiled awkwardly before trying to explain herself. I mean, look at the situation. I couldn't exactly ignore my conscience. Then she looked at him more gently before continuing, Harry, you know I like you, right? Trust me. I'll definitely think of another solution for your problem. Trying to cheer him up, she held the wyvern leader's scale up in front of him. Look at this. Thanks to you, we ended up getting an amazing item. Harry glanced at it but still looked unconvinced. Before either of them could continue the conversation, Iveria suddenly paused. Wait, I hear something. A loud series of wing beats echoed throughout the forest. Moments later, an entire herd of wyverns descended from the sky and surrounded the two of them. Iveria instinctively tensed, expecting an attack. Instead, every wyvern respectfully circled around her before lowering its head toward the scale in her hand. They obediently bowed before her one after another. Iveria looked around in amazement. I'm sorry for killing your kind, she said quietly. Suddenly, another voice interrupted the moment. My lady! Iveria and Harry turned around in surprise. Standing nearby was Sir Lionel, staring at the enormous gathering of wyverns with absolute terror written all over his face. What are you doing here? Iveria asked in confusion. My lady, I'll protect you, Lionel declared bravely despite the fact that he was practically frozen in fear. Iveria looked at him before glancing toward the sword lying several steps away on the ground. Protect me. With what? Lionel followed her gaze before realizing he had dropped his weapon. Pardon, he muttered awkwardly. Your sword is over there, Iveria pointed out. Meanwhile, Harry had already transformed back into his little white dog form. Looking at the approaching knights, Iveria quietly sighed. Not this again. Harry looked equally disappointed. The guards are here already. Looks like I snuck out here for nothing. Sometime later, Iveria found herself riding through the sky on the back of one of the wyverns with Harry beside her. The powerful creature soared effortlessly above the forests and mountains of Eril. Harry glanced toward her before asking, Aren't you scared? Iveria simply smiled as the wind rushed past her. No, not at all. I'm actually enjoying the speed. Looking around at the breathtaking scenery beneath them, she continued, Harry, these wyverns are much more comfortable to ride than horses or even carriages. I wonder if there's some way I could make use of this. I'll think about it later. Before long, the wyvern landed inside the territory. The moment everyone saw the enormous creature descending from the sky, panic immediately spread through the area. It's a wyvern! The guards shouted as they instinctively reached for their weapons. Lower your weapons, Everia immediately ordered before anyone could attack. At the same time, Harry transformed back into his harmless little white dog form. The guards stared at her in complete confusion. Lady Everia, what exactly is this? My lady. Without answering immediately, Everia calmly walked toward Leiden. Your Highness, may I have a word with you? Once they were speaking privately, Everia smiled slightly before saying, as you can see, I've made a new friend. The people around them immediately began whispering among themselves. Did she really tame a wyvern? That's impossible. Inside the room, Leiden looked at her seriously before asking, did you truly tame the wyvern? Didn't you see it yourself? Everia replied calmly. Leiden remained unconvinced. How can you prove it's completely under your control? Everia answered without hesitation. I have very little reason to lie about something that could be exposed so easily. After a brief silence, Leiden asked another question. I'm assuming you have no intention of telling the royal family how you managed to tame a wyvern. Of course not, Everia answered. However, I would actually like you to take all the credit for this. Leiden looked genuinely surprised. Report to the royal family that the wyvern problem has been completely resolved, she continued. And what exactly do you gain from doing that? He asked. Everia smiled faintly. I won't have to keep meeting people I'd rather avoid. I intend to spend the rest of my life living quietly here in Eril. Once the wyvern problem disappears, the royal family will have very little reason to pay attention to this territory anymore. That means we can end our relationship on good terms. Leiden looked at her with disbelief. You're seriously going to let me receive all the credit? For such a petty reason? Petty? Everia immediately objected. This is an incredibly important matter to me. Besides, I certainly don't feel like letting the Crown Prince take credit for everything. He visited me not long ago and completely ruined my mood. As she glanced toward Leiden, another memory from the original novel surfaced in her mind. After Cassian eventually became king, Leiden left the kingdom. Only a few months later, however, his bloody corpse was discovered on a distant continent. Most likely, he had been assassinated on Cassian's orders. Thinking back on the novel, Everia realized something that had always bothered her. Among all the major characters, only two ultimately met tragic ends. One was Everia. The other was Leiden. Is this why I keep feeling sorry for him? She quietly wondered. After thinking for a while, Leiden finally sighed. All right, fine. I'll accept the poison chalice you're handing me. Everia immediately shook her head. It's not poisoned. Anyway, let's discuss the details for tomorrow. By the time everything had finally been settled, the day had already come to an end. Returning to her room, Everia stretched her arms and yawned. I'm so sleepy. I'm completely exhausted. Just as she turned around, she suddenly froze. Standing quietly behind her was Sir Eloitz. Looking at him with surprise, she asked, May I ask why you're following me? He doesn't talk. Everia quietly recalled to herself as she walked beside Sir El through the dimly lit corridor. Trying to break the silence, she smiled awkwardly before saying, I mean, my dog's already with me, so if you're simply trying to escort me, there's really no need to worry. Sir El finally responded in his usual calm voice. The hour is late. It is against a knight's code to allow a lady to walk alone at night. Everia stopped for a brief moment, genuinely surprised that he had answered at all. Her eyes widened as she stared at him in amazement. Wow, what a surprise. You really do have a very nice voice, sir. A handsome face paired with such a deep, husky voice. What a combination. Her heart skipped a beat as she continued looking at him with complete sincerity. You have such a nice voice. How come you barely ever speak? Beside her, Harry, still in his little white dog form, looked visibly annoyed and began tugging on the hem of her skirt to get her attention. Completely ignoring him, Everia continued smiling at Sir El. Honestly, if I had a voice like yours, I'd be talking all day long. She patiently waited for an answer, but Sir El simply remained silent. Meanwhile, old memories began resurfacing in his mind. Laughter echoed through his memories. Ha 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 ha. Look at this little runt. Please, give me back my sword, brother. Can any of you hear the baby crying? Give it back. As a child, Sir El had been born into the prestigious Lloyd's family, a household renowned throughout the kingdom for producing exceptional knights. Unfortunately, unlike his older brothers, he had been small and physically weak during his childhood. Because of his appearance and his voice, he had constantly been mocked by the very people who should have protected him. His brothers teased him relentlessly, kicked him to the ground, and laughed whenever he tried to speak. "Stop whining. Your voice is irritating." As he grew older, he eventually realized that their cruelty had never truly been about his voice. They had simply been jealous because, despite his smaller stature, he possessed greater talent with the sword than any of them. Even after he matured, became taller, and his voice naturally deepened, the fear remained. Speaking in front of other people had become something he unconsciously avoided. Returning to the present, Everia looked at him once more before saying gently, "You really do have a wonderful voice." At first, Sir El had assumed she was mocking him. After all, she was Everia Oberon, the woman whose reputation throughout the kingdom was nothing short of terrible. But the more he looked into her eyes, the more he realized there wasn't the slightest trace of ridicule. She genuinely meant every word. His expression unconsciously softened. Everia immediately noticed the subtle change and became flustered herself. What's with that expression? She thought. Has no one ever complimented his voice before? Then another memory from the original novel suddenly surfaced in her mind. Wait, wasn't Catherine supposed to be the one who helped him overcome his fear of speaking? That happened near the end of the novel, after Catherine married Cassian, didn't it? Her eyes widened in horror. That means... Before she could think any further, Sir El calmly stopped walking. "We have arrived. I'll take my leave now, Lady Everia." Everia watched him leave before silently panicking. I just made a huge mistake." The moment she entered her room, she immediately turned toward Harry. "Harry! Isn't there some kind of magic that can erase someone's memories?" Harry looked at her as though she had asked the most ridiculous question imaginable. "Of course there isn't." Everia frowned. "But wasn't there another famous magician named Harry who could erase memories? So why can't you?" Harry blinked in confusion. "What are you even talking about?" Everia let out a defeated sigh. "If you don't know how, then just forget it. Good night." Without another word, she hurried into her bedroom and slammed the door shut behind her. Outside, Sir El remained standing in the hallway for a few quiet moments. "Lady Everia Oberon," he softly murmured to himself before finally walking away. Inside the room, Everia threw herself face first onto the bed before rolling over dramatically. "Whatever. I'm sure he won't take something a wicked woman like me said all that seriously anyway." She buried her face into the blankets before rolling from side to side. Harry had already transformed back into his human form and was sitting comfortably on the bed, quietly watching her strange behavior. After calming down, Everia lay beside him, and the two of them found themselves facing one another in silence. Harry suddenly spoke first. "I'm still really upset, you know." Everia sighed. "Right. Come on. You've already killed more than enough wyverns." Harry looked away with an obvious look of disappointment. "Well, those days are over now." Everia moved a little closer toward him before asking softly, "Harry, are you really going to stay mad at me like this?" Harry deliberately turned his head away from her. Everia leaned over to catch his gaze, but he simply turned his face in the opposite direction again. She shifted to the other side. Harry turned away once more. No matter how many times she tried, he stubbornly refused to look at her. After several attempts, Everia finally let out an exhausted sigh. "Harry, how much longer are we going to keep doing this? I'm actually starting to get dizzy." Harry remained silent for a while before finally speaking. "Let's do it one last time. If we stop now, it feels like I'd be giving in too easily. Just one more time, all right?" As he quietly used his magic, a gentle breeze flowed through the room. Everia smiled faintly. "The breeze feels nice." After a brief silence, she spoke again in a much gentler voice. "Harry, I know how important blood is to demons. I really am taking your situation seriously. I promise I'll find another solution somehow, so trust me. Just give me a little more time." She continued, thinking out loud. "Of course, there are other dangerous beasts living in different territories. But if we suddenly started hunting them, it could easily turn into a political issue." Looking back at Harry, she finally asked the question that had been worrying her the most. "How much longer can you keep holding yourself back?" Harry thought for a moment before answering honestly. "If I completely stop using magic, I can probably last for several months. But if I have to keep transforming into a dog all the time, then probably about 1 month. 1 month, Iveria repeated quietly. Her face immediately turned pale. Wait, if I don't find another solution within a month, are you going to bite my head off and kill me? Harry immediately sat upright in disbelief. Why on earth would you think something that terrifying? Nothing like that is going to happen. Just do your best to find another solution. Iveria looked at him suspiciously. Really? Honestly? Harry sighed while rubbing his forehead. Of course. Why wouldn't I be honest? Then, after a brief pause, he looked back at her curiously before asking, anyway, why did you decide to let that prince take all the credit? I am going to make Irel's guards the world's very first dragon knights by having them ride the wyverns. That alone will prove that I have complete control over them. Since I possess the wyvern leader's scale, I can ask the wyverns for their cooperation whenever necessary. This way, everyone benefits. The wyverns will no longer have to sacrifice their young, humans will no longer be attacked, and peace can finally exist between both sides. Looking toward the people gathered before her, Iveria continued explaining her proposal. My lady is finished, one of the attendants announced, and of course it will be the Frost Guard who will become the first knights to ride the wyverns. The royal family can also receive the hides and claws from the wyverns that have already been killed. They have absolutely nothing to lose. In fact, they would be receiving valuable materials from creatures that are already extremely difficult to hunt. If we can prove the Oberon family's loyalty to the crown, then no matter how powerful Irel becomes, the royal family will have no reason to grow suspicious of us. Looking confidently toward Harry, Iveria smiled before asking, Don't you agree, Harry? She then turned toward Leiden, who had been quietly listening from across the table. What do you think? Leiden folded his arms as he carefully considered everything she had said. Your proposal sounds almost too good to be true, he finally admitted. Iveria simply smiled. Then when you submit your report, write only the good things about this territory. Tell them Irel is nothing more than a peaceful, quiet region in the far north. Honestly, I'd be perfectly happy if I never had to see anyone else's pets wandering around here ever again. Then, as though remembering something important, her expression became slightly more serious. By the way, if you have some personal grudge against me, I'd appreciate it if you directed it toward me alone. Leiden looked genuinely confused. What are you talking about? Don't pretend you don't know. I'm referring to what happened with the firewood. The Exiled company suddenly stopped supplying firewood to Irel without any notice. Leiden's eyes widened in surprise. What? Iveria continued, I know just how difficult surviving the northern winter is without firewood, so I assumed you were responsible. Leiden immediately shook his head. Why would I ever do something like that? Besides, the Exiled company is infamous for its greed. They make an enormous profit from trading with Irel every year. My uncle would never agree to stop doing business simply because I asked him to. In fact, from what I heard, it was Irel that terminated the contract first. The room suddenly fell silent. Iveria and Leiden exchanged puzzled glances before arriving at the exact same conclusion. Something strange is definitely going on. If neither side had intentionally cut ties with the other, then someone had manipulated the situation behind the scenes. Iveria quietly thought through the possibilities. The Oberon family and Earl Melior, who controlled the Exiled company. Who would benefit from turning those two families against each other? Looking back at Leiden, she asked, Does anyone come to mind? Leiden remained thoughtful for a few moments before replying, There is one possibility. But I can't say for certain yet. Is there any way to confirm it? Iveria asked. Leiden nodded slightly. I do have a trustworthy informant. Hearing that, Iveria immediately thought of one particular person. Is he talking about Luke? Luke was the leader of an information guild and a master of disguise whose network extended across the kingdom. Surprisingly, he and Leiden had become close friends after meeting while Leiden was traveling the country in disguise. Once they discovered each other's true identities, they continued their journey together, overcoming countless obstacles along the way. Catherine had also accompanied them throughout that adventure, making the three of them inseparable companions in the original story. Well, if his source really is Luke, then it's definitely trustworthy, Iveria thought to herself. Looking back at Leiden, she smiled faintly. I am indebted to you for everything you've done. I'll make sure to repay you properly someday. Leiden smiled in return. If you're going to repay me, I'd prefer it in hard currency. Iveria laughed softly. You sound exactly like your uncle right now. Leiden chuckled. Even so, you have my word. With that, the discussion came to a satisfying conclusion. Their cooperation had gone far more smoothly than either of them had expected. However, a completely unexpected problem soon appeared. The following day, Everia watched the Frost Guard struggling in complete frustration. I heard it was serious yesterday, but I honestly couldn't believe it until I saw it with my own eyes. It looks like they really can't even mount the wyverns. One after another, the knights failed miserably as the wyverns refused to cooperate. Some were thrown off almost immediately, while others couldn't even climb onto their backs. Watching the chaotic scene unfold, Everia quietly reflected on the situation. The Knights of Oberon traditionally pledged their loyalty to a single member of the Oberon bloodline. Most of them served Duke Oberon directly. However, the Fifth Order was completely different. Rather than serving the family itself, they operated more like mercenaries hired specifically to defend Raven Forest against wyvern attacks. Because of that, they had never formally sworn loyalty to anyone in House Oberon. Everia had proposed creating the Dragon Knights largely because she didn't want those soldiers to lose their livelihoods after peace had finally been established with the wyverns. Unfortunately, reality proved far more difficult than expected. One of the assistants awkwardly scratched his head before explaining, well, practically anyone could join the Fifth Order. We couldn't exactly expect highly trained knights to volunteer for such a cold and barren territory. Everia let out a disappointed sigh. At best, we only have people like Lionel. Looking across the training grounds, she watched yet another knight fail spectacularly before rubbing her forehead. A dragon knight really is starting to feel like an impossible dream. Standing nearby, Leiden quietly commented, Your Highness, why don't you simply send the wyverns to the Royal Guard? I'm sure they'd make much better use of them there. Everia immediately turned toward him. Don't you know that greed often causes people to lose far more than they gain? Then she gently poked him on the shoulder before adding, Oh, I'm sorry. Was I being a little too informal with you? Leiden smiled calmly. No, I'm actually surprised we've reached the point where we can joke with each other like this. Everia immediately looked away. I have absolutely no interest in developing any kind of relationship with you. Leiden burst into laughter. You're probably the only person who treats me this coldly. Yeah, sure, Everia replied without much interest. Only then did she notice the surrounding knights quietly watching the two of them. Realizing everyone was paying attention, she quickly took a step away from Leiden. Leiden simply smiled before taking something from inside his robe and holding it out toward her. Here! Everia looked at the small pouch in confusion. What's this? The repayment you asked for. Everia immediately snatched it from his hand. Is this money? Her eyes brightened with excitement as she quickly opened the pouch. I see. You're actually a man of your word. Then she looked inside. Her cheerful expression instantly froze. Looking back up at Leiden in complete disbelief, she asked, Are you actually serious about this? Without the slightest hesitation, Leiden simply nodded. Yes, of course. I'll keep the same expansion level as the previous one, making it a little richer while maintaining the pacing. As Everia slowly unfolded the check, she stared at it for a few moments before realizing exactly what she was holding. It was a blank check. Looking back up at Leiden in complete surprise, she asked, Are you really serious about this? You don't even know how much money I might write down. Leiden remained perfectly calm before replying, You don't seem like the kind of person who would write down some ridiculous amount. Everia looked at him with a curious smile before asking, Since when did you start trusting me so much? Leiden paused briefly before giving a small smile of his own. When we first met at the hot spring, you asked me whether it was really so difficult to believe that a wicked woman could change. You were right. I always believed it was nearly impossible for someone considered evil to change so easily. But, after everything I've seen, it became much harder not to believe you. You truly have changed. Before Everia could respond, a loud crash echoed from the training grounds nearby. Oh dear! Sir Lionel fell over again. Both of them instinctively glanced toward the window before Leiden looked back at Everia. Tell me, don't you ever want to return to the capital? Everia quietly lowered her gaze. That's not really something I can decide for myself. In the original novel, Duke Oberon had never once called Everia back to the capital after sending her away. Thinking about that, she quietly answered, I suppose that's the truth. Especially considering the public opinion surrounding me and father's anger. Leiden nodded thoughtfully before saying, Perhaps. Even so, something tells me I'll be seeing you again in the capital someday. As he prepared to leave, he suddenly remembered something and smiled faintly. Oh, I almost forgot. That check can only be cashed at the central bank in the capital. Everia's expression immediately froze. What? The central bank? In the capital? By then, Leiden was already walking away. Well then, I'll see you soon. The moment he disappeared, Everia angrily waved the check in the air. What a con artist. Hurry up and leave already, she shouted after him. Even so, as she watched him disappear into the distance, she quietly thought to herself, after everything I've done for him, I just hope he survives this time. Consider it my small act of kindness toward another character destined for tragedy. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Leiden sat quietly inside his room when one of the servants announced that he had a visitor. I don't remember inviting anyone. A man entered respectfully before saying, I'm here to deliver a letter sent by the connoisseur. Leiden's eyes immediately sharpened. Is it from Luke? Did the connoisseur have anything else to say? No, Your Highness. No? This letter was all I was instructed to deliver. I see. Leiden quietly stood up before placing his hand on the hilt of his sword. Then you're not the connoisseur's messenger. Before the visitor could react, Leiden swiftly drew his sword. What? The startled man immediately jumped backward. Hey! Were you seriously about to attack me? Leiden simply smiled. I knew it was you from the beginning, Luke. Right away, in fact. Luke stared at him in disbelief. What? But my disguise was absolutely perfect. Leiden calmly shook his head. The biggest giveaway was the letter itself. It was much too thin. The information I requested could never have fit on a single page. Besides, something that important would never be entrusted to an ordinary messenger. That's how I knew it was you. Luke sighed dramatically before laughing. Duly noted, Leiden geraint. Then Leiden asked, So, what did you discover? Luke folded his arms. My people are still investigating. Leiden looked completely unimpressed. What? If you haven't found the answer to either of my questions, then what exactly are you doing all the way out here? Luke smiled mischievously. Well, what else would the connoisseur be doing in the countryside? There's something exciting happening here. A festival. Back at the mansion, Everia was peacefully stretching while Harry, in his little white dog form, rested beside her. Emma happily entered the room before announcing, My lady, today is the festival to see the royal knights off. I'm sure it'll help take your mind off everything that's been worrying you. Everia smiled slightly. That's true. Honestly, I've been getting pretty stressed watching our guards get thrown off those wyverns over and over again. Alright then. Emma, you know Ariel like the back of your hand, don't you? Guide me around the festival. Emma looked flustered. Me? Are you planning to go with someone else? Everia asked. Of course not, my lady. I'll be working today. Aren't you planning on going with His Highness instead? What? Everia looked completely shocked. Wait, are you talking about Leiden? Why on earth would I go to a festival with him? Emma gasped dramatically. My lady! You can't simply call the prince by his name like that. Everia shrugged without much concern. Who cares? It's not like he's standing here listening to us. Besides, I'm sure all of you call me by my name whenever you gossip behind my back anyway. Emma immediately shook her head so hard that she nearly lost her balance. Never. Absolutely never. Not me. I would never say anything like that, whether you were standing in front of me or behind my back. Everia blinked in surprise. Emma. All right. I get it. Emma suddenly became emotional. It's because I like you so much, my lady. Everia smiled awkwardly. Thanks. Emma quickly wiped her eyes before continuing. Don't pay any attention to the people who run their mouths. Everia shrugged. I honestly don't mind. Emma immediately protested. They're just ungrateful fools. It was thanks to you that we survived this terrible cold, and yet they still spread rumors about you. You let them get away with it because you're far too kind, but honestly, you should punish them. Kind? Me? Everia repeated in disbelief. Yes. Anyway, I just wanted you to know how much I truly admire you, my lady. Everia smiled warmly. I'm genuinely flattered. This was the first time since reincarnating into Everia's body that someone had openly expressed such sincere affection toward her. Emma suddenly clapped her hands together with excitement. Which is exactly why you have to go to today's festival with the prince. You need everyone to see what kind of person you really are. Everia stared at her blankly. How did this conversation possibly lead to that conclusion? She wondered. You want me to prove my authority by bringing the prince with me? Emma, I don't want to use someone else just to prove myself. Nearby, Harry quietly watched the entire conversation unfold without interrupting. Emma immediately shook her head. Of course not. You don't need anyone's help. You alone are already wonderful enough, my lady. The prince would simply be an accessory, like a beautiful earring. Iveria could not help laughing. Don't you think treating a prince like an accessory is even worse than calling him by his name? Emma shrugged confidently. But he's not here, so who cares? Then she proudly declared, never let an accessory choose you. Only you can choose the ornament that makes you shine the brightest. Always remember, men are only accessories. Madame Louise says so. She's an incredibly famous romance novelist. Iveria could only stare at her speechlessly. Before she could respond, Emma suddenly looked toward the doorway. Oh, my lady, you have another guest. As the two of them turned toward the entrance, a voice from outside calmly announced itself. It was Sir L. Loitz, Lady Iveria. Hearing the familiar voice at the entrance, Iveria immediately turned around and smiled politely. Sir L., I'm sorry for keeping you waiting. There was a bit of a misunderstanding with my maid. Only a short while earlier, Emma had been rushing around the room in complete panic while helping Iveria get ready. Oh, my soul! It's Sir L who's waiting for you, not His Highness. Emma had exclaimed dramatically while fixing Iveria's hair and carefully dusting a little makeup across her face. Are you even listening to me, my lady? Iveria had replied honestly without even looking at her. No. Emma let out a helpless sigh before continuing. Sir L would make a perfectly wonderful partner for you. Iveria could only stare at her in disbelief. Has she completely lost her mind? Returning to the present, Sir L politely shook his head. I didn't wait very long. I only just arrived. I hope I didn't interrupt any plans you had for today. Iveria smiled reassuringly. Not at all. I was already on my way to the festival, so you didn't interrupt anything. Then, after glancing behind him for a moment, she tilted her head in confusion. Hm. Hold on. Who exactly was I talking to just now? Is someone standing behind you? She looked from one side to the other as if searching for another person. Sir L looked puzzled by her sudden question. My lady. Before he could finish speaking, Iveria laughed softly. I'm only teasing you. So, you've really decided to start talking more often now? A faint blush appeared across Sir L's face as he looked away awkwardly. You said my voice was nice, didn't you? Iveria blinked before smiling warmly. My goodness. Yes, I did. Wait, seriously? Did he really overcome his fear of speaking just because of something I said? Then, what about Catherine? The realization struck her immediately. Sir L hadn't appeared very often in the original novel, but one of his biggest character developments was overcoming his fear of speaking because of Catherine. Have I accidentally changed another important part of the story? Before she could dwell on the thought any longer, Sir L carefully held out a book toward her. My lady, something occurred to me while watching the guards train this morning. Please forgive me for coming without notice, but we're returning to the capital tomorrow, so I didn't have much time. I thought it would be better to bring this to you personally. Please, take it. Iveria accepted the book with both hands before looking down at the cover. A book about horse barding. Sir L nodded. It also contains detailed information about saddles, stirrups, riding equipment, and protective armor. I thought it might help you while trying to figure out a proper way to ride the wyverns. Iveria's eyes immediately lit up with interest as she quickly flipped through several pages. I see. This is actually much more useful than I expected. Then she began thinking aloud while studying the illustration. A saddle is definitely necessary. Wyverns are much larger than horses, and the way they move through the air is much rougher. A normal saddle probably wouldn't be stable enough. I think something connected directly to the rider's armor as one complete piece would work much better. It would also need to be light enough not to interfere with flight while still providing enough support. Sir L quietly listened before nodding in agreement. That's an excellent idea. The only problem is that manufacturing something that complex would be extremely difficult. Suddenly Harry, still disguised as the little white dog, interrupted the conversation. There's only one race capable of making something like that. Dwarves. Iveria immediately looked down at him. Dwarves? Harry nodded confidently. They're unmatched when it comes to craftsmanship. If you provide them with the right materials, they can build almost anything imaginable. Weapons, armor, tools, even things humans consider impossible. The only problem is finding them. They dislike humans and usually isolate themselves deep within mountain villages where outsiders rarely ever reach. Iveria rested a hand beneath her chin while thinking. But if we can locate them, we should at least be able to negotiate with them. Or, if negotiations fail, perhaps threaten them a little. Harry shrugged as though that sounded perfectly reasonable. Iveria laughed before gently patting him on the head. Thank you, Harry. You're always surprisingly helpful. You're the best. Harry proudly puffed out his chest. Of course I am. Sir El quietly watched the interaction before speaking once more. Thank you for hearing me out today. I truly hope the book proves useful. Iveria smiled gratefully. No, thank you for bringing it all the way here. You didn't have to do that. I'll definitely repay you someday. At that moment, Emma entered carrying a tray of freshly prepared tea. The tea is ready, my lady. Then she looked back and forth between Iveria and Sir El several times before a huge smile spread across her face. Oh, are you already finished talking? Wonderful. Then the two of you are heading to the festival together now, right? Iveria immediately shook her head. Together? No. I already told you it isn't like that. Turning towards Sir El, she sighed helplessly. This is exactly the misunderstanding I mentioned earlier. The maids somehow convinced themselves that you and I were meeting for a date, so they've been busy dressing me up all morning. Sir El visibly flinched before quietly replying, I actually thought you were preparing for another important appointment. Iveria pointed toward Emma. I was. With her. Emma suddenly coughed awkwardly before avoiding Iveria's gaze. Oh, well, I just remembered there's something important I absolutely have to finish first. I'm afraid I won't be able to accompany you today, my lady. She dramatically placed both hands on her cheeks. My lady will have to wander around the entire festival all by herself. She'll be completely alone. Her eyes desperately shifted towards Sir El as though silently begging him to understand. Hurry up. Ask her. Sir El became noticeably more nervous under Emma's relentless pressure. Iveria simply smiled and shook her head. Emma, you're worrying far too much. I'll be perfectly fine on my own. After taking a deep breath to gather his courage, Sir El finally spoke. If you don't mind, would you allow me the honor of accompanying you to the festival? Iveria blinked in surprise. I'm sorry? Before long, the three of them arrived at the festival. The entire city had transformed into a sea of lights. Brilliant fireworks exploded overhead, painting the night sky with dazzling colors while cheerful music echoed throughout the bustling streets. Merchants enthusiastically called customers toward their stalls, children laughed as they ran through the crowd, and the warm glow of lanterns illuminated every corner of the marketplace. Looking around with genuine amazement, Iveria quietly thought, this is much more lively than I expected. Walking beside Sir El while Harry trotted faithfully at her feet, she couldn't shake the awkward atmosphere surrounding them. This is incredibly awkward. Suddenly, another familiar voice interrupted the silence. Wow, you two really do make quite the awkward pair. Turning around, Iveria found Eden standing there with his usual teasing grin. Well, you don't exactly fit in here either, she replied. Eden laughed before casually throwing an arm around Sir El's shoulders. It was rather cruel of you to leave me behind, especially considering I was the one who told you about this festival in the first place. And please, call me Eden. Sir El immediately removed his arm. Don't lean on me. Watching the two of them argue, Iveria smiled faintly before saying, I have to admit, you really put a lot of thought into your aliases. Eden shrugged playfully. It's never good to deceive people too much. You're quite the honest young lady, aren't you? As the two men continued chatting back and forth, Iveria quietly sighed to herself. I honestly want to go home already. Why am I spending my evening with these two? Just then, Harry gently tugged on the hem of her skirt. Master, let's leave those idiots here and enjoy the festival ourselves. Iveria couldn't help smiling. Sure, let's go. Before they managed to take more than a few steps, another commotion suddenly erupted behind them. What are you doing? Sir El demanded in a stern voice. Eden simply smiled innocently. Impersonating a member of the royal family is a serious crime. Where is His Highness? Sir El asked. Luke sighed dramatically before answering, Don't be so serious. I only put him to sleep for a little while. Besides, I'm not here for you, so would you kindly let go? Sir El refused to move. Do you really think I'll stand by and let you do whatever you want? Luke smirked mischievously. Since when did you become so talkative? A little while ago you looked exactly like a shy young man going on his very first date. Sir El immediately released him before looking away. What I do, or what I think, is none of your concern. Luke narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Don't tell me you're... Before he could finish, a massive pillar of flame suddenly burst into the night sky. The explosion illuminated the entire festival, instantly drawing everyone's attention. The cheerful atmosphere vanished as people began shouting in confusion. What's happening? What's that fire? Lady Averia! Ladies and gentlemen, today is your lucky day. The stall owner enthusiastically shouted as a lively crowd gathered around his booth. You can make more money than you spend. It doesn't get any easier than this. You have a 1 in 3 chance of winning, and if you guess correctly, you'll receive 3 times the amount you bet. So, is anyone willing to test their luck? Averia quietly stopped in front of the stall and watched the game with curiosity. The crowd around it was surprisingly large, with people eagerly placing bets while the owner continued drawing in more customers with his loud, confident voice. Looking around at the bustling festival, she smiled to herself. So they have games like this here as well. Standing beside her in his human form, Harry glanced at the stall before asking, "Are you going to try?" Averia nearly jumped in surprise as she turned toward him. "Geez, you scared me. Why did you suddenly change into your human form?" Harry looked at her with an innocent expression before replying, "Because you constantly forget that I'm not actually a dog." Then he leaned forward slightly and asked with a faint smile, "So, do I still look like a dog to you?" For a brief moment, Averia simply stared at him. The slight smile on his face, his flawless features, and the way the festival lights reflected in his eyes made him seem almost unreal. Her cheeks gradually turned red before she quickly looked away. "Every single time I see his face, I can't believe someone could actually be this beautiful. It's almost unfair." Then she immediately shook her head to clear her thoughts. "How dare you try to use your looks to seduce your own master?" Harry blinked in confusion before smiling even wider. "So, you do like me after all?" Averia folded her arms and immediately denied it. "It's your face that I like, not you." Harry tilted his head. "Aren't those basically the same thing?" "Of course not. Liking someone's appearance is completely different from liking who they are as a person." Harry looked genuinely puzzled. "What's wrong with my personality?" Averia pointed toward his chest. "Put your hand over your heart and think very carefully about everything you've done since we met." Harry obediently placed a hand on his chest before thinking for several seconds. "Nothing comes to mind." Averia let out a defeated sigh. "Goodness, just forget it." As they continued walking through the festival together, Harry casually hummed to himself while enjoying the atmosphere. Suddenly, Averia's attention returned to the gambling stall. She had been quietly observing it for several minutes now, and something finally caught her eye. One of the children standing nearby suddenly cried out, "Mister, you changed it. Please give me back my money." Several other children looked equally upset as they pleaded with the stall owner. "Do you have any proof? Show me proof if you're going to accuse me," the man replied without the slightest bit of shame. Averia narrowed her eyes. The more she watched, the more obvious it became that the game was rigged. He really is a complete crook. Looking toward Harry, she quietly said, "I want to teach him a lesson. Can you help me?" Harry nodded without hesitation. Averia smiled mischievously. "Let's take all of his money by figuring out how his trick works. We'll completely ruin his game." Harry thought about it for a second before shrugging. "That's one way to do it. But why don't we use a much faster method?" Averia looked at him suspiciously. "Like what?" Harry grinned. "Something like this." He casually snapped his fingers. Instantly, one of the dolls decorating the gambling stall burst into bright blue flames. The entire crowd erupted into panic. "Fire!" someone shouted as people immediately began running in every direction. Averia's eyes widened. "We should run." Without wasting another second, she grabbed Harry's hand and the two of them hurried away from the commotion before anyone noticed them. A short while later, both of them stopped in a quiet corner of the festival, completely out of breath. Harry looked delighted by the chaos they had caused. "So, did you like that? How was it?" Averia leaned against the wall while laughing between breaths. Ha! I seriously need to start exercising more." Harry gently held both sides of her face before calmly saying, "Take a deep breath. Don't talk for a moment." Averia obediently tried to steady her breathing. Just then, footsteps approached from behind. Startled, she instinctively jumped toward Harry and grabbed onto him. Standing behind them was an elderly woman with a gentle smile on her face. "Young lady, take this." Averia looked at her in confusion. "I'm sorry?" The old woman slowly held out a ring toward her. "It's yours." Averia immediately shook her head. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else. That ring doesn't belong to me." The old woman simply smiled. "Look more carefully, my lady. It is yours. Come." Look closely. As she gently took Aviria's hand and placed the ring into her palm, Aviria froze. Her breathing suddenly stopped. What is this doing here? She whispered in disbelief. It was an ancient ring made from the heart of the sun god. Or at least, it looked exactly like it. Before she had reincarnated into this world, Aviria had purchased that very same ring during a business trip to Peru. She still remembered admiring it on the flight home, just before the plane crashed. Looking up in shock, she hurriedly asked, "Excuse me, where did you get?" The old woman was gone. She had completely disappeared without a trace. Aviria looked around frantically, but there was no sign of her anywhere. Later that night, back inside her room, Aviria quietly rolled the ring across the table while staring at it with an uneasy expression. Whatever. Is this simply a similar ring? Or is it actually the same sun god ring that I bought before I was reincarnated? She slowly slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, almost as though it had always belonged there. She carefully examined it again but couldn't sense anything unusual. I don't feel any sort of magical power coming from it. Yet somehow, it makes me feel strangely uneasy. Harry quietly observed it from across the table before speaking. Even I find that ring disturbing. Hearing Harry say that only made Aviria even more unsettled. Seriously, what exactly is going on? Just then, there was a knock at the door. Emma entered the room with her usual smile. "My lady, the royal knights are preparing to return to the capital." Aviria barely looked up. "And?" Emma blinked in surprise. "Aren't you going to see them off?" "See them off?" Aviria replied. "Why would I?" Emma smiled knowingly. "You won't get to see Sir El once he leaves." At that exact moment, Harry, who had transformed back into his little white dog form, quietly stared at Emma without saying a word. His expression gradually became more serious. "Master," Harry suddenly said, "I'm only telling you this because you haven't noticed. But that's not your maid." Aviria's eyes immediately widened. "What?" Harry continued staring at Emma. "The smell of her blood is different." Aviria's thoughts began racing. Emma doesn't have a twin sister. Then if this person isn't Emma, someone is impersonating her. There was only one person she knew who possessed that level of disguise. The fake Emma tilted her head innocently. "My lady? Are you listening to me?" Aviria smiled as though nothing was wrong. Of course I am. All ears." Inside her mind, however, she had already reached her conclusion. "So, it's you, Luke, the guild master of the Information Guild."